Welcome back to our channel. Today's story will leave you absolutely speechless. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Adaora Okafor stared at her phone screen, her hands trembling as she reread the message from her stepmother's lawyer. The words blurred together through her tears. Estate distribution complete. Pastor Emeka Nwosu. Full donation. Nothing remaining. She pressed her back against the cold wall of her cramped Lagos apartment in Surulere, sliding down until she sat on the floor. 26 years old, drowning in medical school debt. And now this. Her father's N500 million estate, gone. Every naira donated to some pastor she'd never heard of. Chiamaka, you need to see this, she whispered into her phone, calling her best friend. Ada, what's wrong? You sound terrible. My stepmother. She gave away everything. Dad's entire inheritance. All of it went to her pastor. Chiamaka's sharp intake of breath echoed through the phone. That witch! Ada, there has to be something you can do. Your father built that construction empire from nothing. He wouldn't want it going to some stranger. Adaora's grief began crystallizing into something harder, more dangerous. Her father, Obinna Okafor, had worked 18-hour days building Okafor Construction from a single cement mixer to one of Lagos State's most successful firms. He'd promised her that legacy would secure her future, help her finish medical school, maybe even start her own practice. I trusted her, Chiamaka. When Dad married Halima 5 years ago, I thought she genuinely loved him. I was so stupid. You were grieving and hopeful. That's different from stupid. As Adaora hung up, she noticed something odd. Her father's old briefcase sat in the corner, the one item Halima had graciously allowed her to keep. Inside, she'd found his business papers, contracts, and financial documents, but now, studying them with new eyes, she noticed discrepancies. Bank statements that didn't match the will. Offshore accounts her father had mentioned in passing but never explained. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your stepmother isn't who you think she is. Meet me tomorrow at Terra Culture, Victoria Island, 3 p.m. Come alone. A friend of your father's. Adaora's heart pounded. Someone else knew something was wrong. The next afternoon, Adaora arrived at Terra Culture 15 minutes early, her father's briefcase clutched tightly in her hands. The cultural centre buzzed with Lagos's intellectual elite, but her eyes searched for anyone who might be waiting for her. Adaora Okafor. She turned to find a distinguished man in his 50s, wearing a crisp white agbada. His eyes held the same calculating intelligence she remembered in her father's gaze. I'm Babajide Adeyemi. I was your father's accountant for 20 years before he let me go. Let you go? Dad never mentioned. He didn't have a choice. Your stepmother insisted on bringing in her own financial advisor, someone more flexible with the books. Babajide led her to a quiet corner table, glancing around nervously. Your father was a good man, but he was blinded by love. Halima convinced him to restructure his assets, create shell companies, move money offshore. She said it was for tax optimization. But it wasn't. Some of it was legitimate, but I discovered she was funneling money into accounts he didn't know about. When I tried to warn him, she convinced him I was trying to embezzle from the company. Adaora's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Do you have proof? Babajide slid a flash drive across the table. Bank records, wire transfers, company registrations. Your stepmother has been systematically stealing from your father's business for 3 years. The money she donated to Pastor Nwosu, it was already hers, moved through a network of shell companies. But why give it to the pastor? Because Pastor Emeka Nwosu is her brother. The revelation hit Adaora like a physical blow. Her stepmother had orchestrated everything, the marriage, the trust, the inheritance. It was all a long con. There's more, Babajide continued. She's been hiding income from the Nigerian tax authorities. The FIRS has been investigating several construction companies for tax evasion. If they knew about these hidden accounts, they'd freeze everything. and prosecute her for fraud. Your father's legitimate estate would be recovered and distributed according to his original will, the one he wrote before he married her. Adaora stared at the flash drive. It was her chance for justice, but it would mean destroying her stepmother's life. Then she remembered her father's words. Ada, in this world, you have to fight for what's yours. Nobody will hand you anything. What do I need to do? Adaora spent 3 days studying the files Babajida had given her. The web of deception was staggering. Shell companies in Dubai, cryptocurrency wallets, property investments in Abuja and London. Her stepmother had stolen nearly 800 million over 3 years. But she needed to understand the full scope before making her move. That's why she found herself driving through the gates of New Jerusalem Ministry in Lekki, where Pastor Emeka Nwosu held court. The church was a monument to excess. Marble floors, gold-plated fixtures, and a parking lot full of luxury cars. Adaora had dressed conservatively, hoping to blend in with the congregation. "Welcome, sister," a woman in an elaborate jeel approached her. "First time visiting New Jerusalem?" "Yes, I heard wonderful things about Pastor Nwosu." "Oh, he's anointed. The man of God has been such a blessing to our community. Just last month, a generous sister donated enough money to complete our new sanctuary. God is good." Adaora's stomach churned. Her inheritance had paid for this opulence. During the service, she watched Pastor Nwosu work the crowd with practiced charisma. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with an expensive suit and a Rolex that caught the stage lights. His sermon focused on seed faith, the idea that financial donations would return multiplied blessings. "Some of you are holding back your breakthrough because you're afraid to sow big seeds," he declared. "But I tell you, when you give sacrificially, God opens the windows of heaven." After the service, Adaora lingered, watching the pastor greet wealthy parishioners. She noticed how he spent extra time with well-dressed women, especially older ones. This wasn't just about her stepmother. It was a pattern. "Sister, you look troubled." She turned to find a woman about her age, with kind eyes and a simple dress that stood out among the designer outfits. "I'm Ifeoluwa," the woman said. "I've been coming here for 2 years, but lately I've had questions." "What kind of questions?" Ifeoluwa glanced around nervously. "About where all the money goes. My grandmother donated her entire pension to the church last year. Pastor Nwosu said it was God's will, but now she can barely afford her medications. That's terrible." "She's not the only one. There are whispers about other women, widows mostly, who've given everything to the ministry. Some people are starting to ask questions." Adaora saw an opportunity. "Would you be willing to talk to those people? I might be able to help." "You're not just another member, are you?" "No. I'm someone who's been robbed by this pastor, and I intend to get justice." Over the next week, Adaora and Ifeoluwa quietly gathered testimonies from church members who'd been financially manipulated. The stories were heartbreaking. Widows convinced to donate their late husband's life insurance, elderly members pressured to sign over property deeds, young couples who'd maxed out credit cards for seed offerings. "We need to be careful," Ifeoluwa warned as they met in a small cafe in Ikeja. "Pastor Nwosu has connections. Politicians, businessmen, even some law enforcement officers attend the church. That's exactly why we need to document everything properly." Adaora spread out bank statements and financial records. "My stepmother's transactions show regular transfers to accounts linked to the church, but there are also payments to individuals, some of them significant amounts." "Bribes?" "Or kickbacks. Look at this. N50 million transferred to an account belonging to Sigun Enterprises the same week the church received a tax exemption renewal." Ifeoluwa studied the documents. "Sigun Adeyemi owns the biggest construction company in Lagos State. He's also on the board of several government agencies, including the one that approves religious organization tax exemptions." "Including that one?" Adaora felt the pieces clicking together. This wasn't just about stolen inheritance. It was about a systematic corruption network using the church as a front. Her personal vendetta had uncovered something much bigger. "We need help," she said. "Someone with legal expertise and connections to the right authorities." "I might know someone. My cousin Kelechi is a prosecutor with the EFCC. He's been investigating religious fraud cases. Can you trust him? He's one of the few honest people I know in government, but Adaora, if we do this, there's no going back. These people will come after us." Adaora thought about her father, about the dreams he'd built for her future, about all the other victims who'd been silenced by shame and fear. "Then we better make sure we win." That night, she called Chiamaka and told her everything. Her best friend was quiet for a long moment. "Ada, this is dangerous. You're talking about taking on people with serious power." "I know, but I can't let them get away with this. Dad always said that evil persists when good people do nothing. What do you need from me? Help me stay safe. And if something happens to me, make sure this story gets out." Kelechi Okonkwo reviewed the evidence for the third time, his brow furrowed in concentration. As a senior prosecutor with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, he'd seen countless fraud cases, but this one was particularly complex. "Your documentation is impressive," he told Adaora and Ifeoluwa. "But prosecuting religious leaders is always politically sensitive. We need ironclad evidence." "What we've shown you proves financial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering," Adaora insisted. "How much more evidence do you need?" "Enough to convince a judge who might be sympathetic to the church. Religious fraud cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute because victims often refuse to testify. They see it as attacking their faith." Ifeoluwa leaned forward. "What if we could get more victims to come forward? People who've been hurt but are afraid to speak out?" "That would help, but we'd need to protect them. Once we start investigating, word will get out. These people have resources and connections." Kelechi's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "I have to take this." He stepped outside, leaving Adaora and Ifeoluwa alone in his office. "He's scared," Ifeoluwa whispered. "I can see it in his eyes." "Maybe he should be. We're all taking risks here." When Kelechi returned, his demeanor had changed. "That was my supervisor. Apparently someone's been asking questions about my recent case assignments. They already know we're investigating. It's possible. The church has people everywhere, but it could also be coincidence." He sat down heavily. "Look, I want to help you, but I need to be smart about this. If we move too quickly, they'll bury the evidence and we'll never get another chance." "So what do you recommend?" "We need to flip someone on the inside, someone with direct knowledge of the financial operations who's willing to testify." Adaora thought about the church staff she'd observed. What about the accountant? Someone has to be managing all these transactions. That's risky. If they're involved in the fraud, they won't cooperate. If they're innocent, approaching them could tip off the pastor. "There might be another option," Ifeoluwa said slowly. "I've been watching the church secretary, Chinasa Ibe. She's been there for years, but lately she seems troubled, like she's seeing things she doesn't like. You think she'd talk to us? Maybe. But we'd need to approach her carefully. She's probably terrified of losing her job." Kelechi nodded. "Let me do some background research on her. If she's clean, and if she has access to the financial records, she could be exactly what we need." As they prepared to leave, Adaora felt a chill of premonition. They were about to cross a line that would change everything. Chinasa Ibe hurried through the empty church corridors, her heart pounding as she approached Pastor Nwosu's office. It was late evening, and the building was supposedly empty, but she'd learned to be cautious. The flash drive hidden in her purse felt like it weighed a ton. She'd been copying financial records for weeks, driven by a conscience that wouldn't let her sleep. The tipping point had come when she'd processed the transfer of Adaora's inheritance to the church accounts. The young woman's face had haunted her dreams. "Working late again, Chinasa?" She spun around to find Segun Adeyemi emerging from the shadows. The construction magnate's presence in the church after hours was unusual and unsettling. "I was just finishing some paperwork, sir." Dedication is admirable, but you should be careful. Sometimes people who work too hard start noticing things they shouldn't. The threat was subtle, but clear. Chinasa forced herself to remain calm. I'm just doing my job, sir. Good. Pastor Nwosu values loyalty above all else. I trust you understand that. After he left, Chinasa's hands shook as she finished copying the files. She documented everything, the shell companies, the money laundering, the bribes to government officials, but she knew that knowledge made her a target. The next morning, she received an unexpected visitor at her apartment in Aja. Adaora Okafor stood at her door looking nervous but determined. Miss Ibe, I'm Adaora. I think we need to talk. I don't know what you're talking about. My stepmother stole my inheritance and gave it to your pastor. I know you processed that transaction. Chinasa's resolve crumbled. Please, I can't. If they find out I talked to you, they're going to find out anyway. Someone saw you copying files last night. The colour drained from Chinasa's face. How do you know that? Because I've been watching the church too. Miss Ibe, I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to expose the truth about what's happening there. They'll kill me. No, they won't. Because I have a prosecutor with the EFCC who can protect you. But I need your help. Chinasa looked at the flash drive in her purse, then at Adaora's desperate face. What do you want to know? Everything. The money laundering, the bribes, the shell companies. I want to know how deep this goes. Deeper than you can imagine. The church is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole network of corrupt officials, businessmen and politicians. They use religious donations to launder money from government contracts. Can you prove it? Chinasa pulled out the flash drive. I've been documenting everything for months. Bank records, wire transfers, communication logs. It's all here. Why? Because I watched them destroy people's lives. Elderly women who gave their last kobo thinking God would bless them. Young couples who borrowed money they couldn't afford. Your stepmother wasn't the only one who stole from family to give to the church. Adaora felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. They finally had the evidence they needed, but she knew their enemies would do anything to stop them. We need to move quickly. Once they realize you've been copying files, they'll try to destroy the evidence. It's too late for that. Pastor Nwosu called me this morning. He wants to see me in his office tomorrow afternoon. Don't go. I have to. If I don't show up, they'll know I've betrayed them. Then we need to get you to safety first. Pastor Emeka Nwosu paced behind his mahogany desk, his usual composure cracking. The phone call from Segun Adeyemi had rattled him more than he cared to admit. She was copying files, Emeka. Your precious secretary has been documenting everything. You're certain? I saw the flash drive. We need to handle this before it becomes a problem. Now, as Nwosu waited for Chinasa to arrive, he wondered how much she actually knew. The church's financial operations were complex, but she'd had access to everything. If she'd been systematic about her copying... A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. But instead of Chinasa, it was Halima Okafor who entered, her face tight with worry. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Your accountant friend Baba Jaidi has been talking to my stepdaughter. What do you mean? I mean, Adaora knows about the shell companies. She's been asking questions, investigating the church's finances. Nwosu's blood ran cold. How much does she know? Enough to be dangerous. And now your secretary is missing. Missing? She didn't show up for work today. Her apartment is empty. Someone helped her disappear. The pastor sank into his chair. This is a disaster. If they have documentation of our operations, they do. My sources tell me she's been working with EFCC prosecutors. They're building a case against all of us. Then we need to move the money immediately. Transfer everything to the Dubai accounts. Liquidate the Nigerian assets. It's too late for that. The authorities are already watching our accounts. Any large transfers will trigger investigations. Halima sat down across from him, her calculating mind working through their options. We need to discredit them before they can testify. make them look like disgruntled former employees and bitter relatives. How? Leave that to me. I still have connections from my late husband's business, people who owe me favors. Meanwhile, across town in a safe house in Abuja, Adaora sat with Chinasa and Kelechi, reviewing the evidence one final time. The secretary's files had revealed a corruption network that stretched from Lagos to the highest levels of government. "We have them," Kelechi said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "Wire transfers, shell company registrations, communication logs. This is enough to bring down the entire network." "When do we move?" Adaora asked. "Tomorrow morning, we'll coordinate with the tax authorities, the banking regulators and the police. Simultaneous raids on the church, the construction company, and the shell company offices." Chinasa looked nervous. "What about protection for witnesses? These people won't hesitate to eliminate threats." "We've arranged for protective custody. You'll be safe." But even as Kelechi spoke, Adaora felt a chill of foreboding. They were about to take on some of the most powerful people in Nigeria. The stakes had never been higher. At 6 a.m. sharp, EFCC agents surrounded New Jerusalem Ministry. Adaora watched from an unmarked car as they broke down the doors, knowing that similar raids were happening simultaneously at Segun Adeyemi's construction company and the various shell company offices. "Target secured," Kelechi's voice crackled through the radio. "We're in the pastor's office." But when they reached Nwosu's private office, they found it empty. The computer hard drives had been removed, filing cabinets stood open and bare, and the safe was empty. Someone had tipped them off. "They knew we were coming," Kelechi said grimly as he surveyed the cleaned-out office. "How is that possible?" Adaora demanded. "We were careful about who we told. There's a leak somewhere. Maybe in my office, maybe in the banking commission, maybe even in the police department." The raids at the other locations yielded similar results. Offices cleared out, computers wiped, financial records destroyed. Years of careful planning had been undone in a single night. "We still have Chinasa's files," Adaora said desperately. "That's enough to prove what they were doing." "It's enough to start an investigation, but without corroborating evidence from their offices, it'll be hard to get convictions. A good lawyer will argue that the files were fabricated." As they regrouped at EFCC headquarters, Kelechi's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened. "What now?" Adaora asked when he hung up. "Pastor Nwosu has called a press conference. He's claiming that he's the victim of a conspiracy by disgruntled former employees and bitter relatives seeking revenge." On the television screen, they watched as Nwosu, flanked by expensive lawyers and sympathetic congregation members, painted himself as a holy man under attack. "These false accusations come from people who want to destroy our ministry," he declared. "Miss Chinasa Ibe was dismissed for embezzlement. Mrs. Halima Okafor is a grieving widow who has been manipulated by her stepdaughter's greed." "He's flipping the narrative," Kelechi said, "making us look like the criminals." "What about the evidence?" Adaora asked. "Without corroboration, it's just one person's word against another's, and they have more resources to fight this in court." But as they watched the press conference, something caught Adaora's attention. In the background, she spotted a familiar face, Segun Adeyemi, trying to stay out of the cameras but clearly coordinating with the pastor's legal team. "He's still here," she said. "Segun didn't run like the others." "So?" "So he's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable because of his government connections. But that could be our advantage." "What do you mean?" "If we can get him to admit his involvement, we might be able to salvage this case." Kelechi looked skeptical. "How do you propose we do that?" "By giving him exactly what he wants, a chance to gloat about how clever he is." 3 days later, Adaora walked into the lobby of the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She'd arranged to meet Segun Adeyemi under the pretense of negotiating a settlement to avoid further embarrassment for both sides. What he didn't know was that she was wearing a wire, and EFCC agents were positioned throughout the hotel. "Miss Okafor," Segun greeted her with a smug smile. "I'm surprised you wanted to meet. I thought you'd be too busy with your failed investigation." "I've learned when to cut my losses," she replied, matching his arrogant tone. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "Indeed, your stepmother was quite upset about the damage to her reputation. She's a good woman who didn't deserve this persecution." They sat in the hotel's restaurant, Segun clearly enjoying what he believed was his victory. "You know your father was a smart man. He understood how business works in this country. It's a shame you didn't inherit his practical wisdom." "What do you mean?" "I mean he knew that success requires certain accommodations. The church donations, the construction contracts, the tax exemptions. It's all part of a system that benefits everyone involved." "Are you admitting that you bribed officials for those tax exemptions?" Segun laughed. "Bribed? Such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as ensuring that deserving institutions receive proper recognition." "And Pastor Nwosu's donations to your construction projects?" "The good pastor understands the value of supporting legitimate business enterprises. His congregation's generous donations have helped build schools, hospitals, roads. It's a beautiful example of faith in action. Even when those donations were stolen from people like my father." "Stolen? Your stepmother made a perfectly legal donation to her church. The fact that you're unhappy with her decision doesn't make it theft." Adara pressed further, knowing she needed a clear admission. "But you helped her move the money through shell companies to avoid taxes, didn't you?" "Tax optimization is perfectly legal, Miss Okafor. We have some of the best accountants in the country ensuring that our business practices comply with all relevant regulations." "What about the money laundering? The fake companies in Dubai?" Segun's smile faltered slightly. "I think you're confusing legitimate international business with criminal activity." "Am I? Because I have bank records showing N50 million transferred from the church to your accounts the same week you received that construction contract from the Lagos state government." "Correlation is not causation, my dear. The church made an investment in a profitable construction project. The timing was coincidental." "And the N20 million payment to Commissioner Adeyemi's account?" "My brother deserves to share in the family business success." "Your brother, who happens to oversee construction permits in Lagos?" Segun's arrogance finally gave way to suspicion. "Miss Okafor, I think this conversation has gone far enough." "Actually, it's gone exactly as far as we needed it to." Kelechi emerged from behind a pillar, flanked by 2 EFCC agents. "Segun Adeyemi, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and bribery of public officials." The businessman's face went white as he realized he'd been trapped. "You can't use anything I said. This was a private conversation." "Actually, you waived your right to privacy when you agreed to meet in a public place to discuss criminal activity," Kelechi replied, signaling to his agents. As they led Segun away in handcuffs, Adaora felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. They'd finally gotten their breakthrough, but she knew the battle was far from over. 6 months later, Adaora stood in the Lagos High Court as Justice Okonkwo delivered the verdict in the case against Pastor Emeka Nwosu, Halima Okafor, and their co-conspirators. The evidence presented by the prosecution has clearly established a pattern of financial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering, the judge declared. The defendants exploited religious faith and family trust to steal millions of naira from innocent victims. Segun Adeyemi's recorded confession had been the key to unravelling the entire conspiracy. Faced with overwhelming evidence, several other conspirators had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. "Pastor Emeka Nwosu, you are sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay N500 million in restitution to victims of your fraud. Halima Okafor, you are sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to return all stolen assets to the legitimate heirs of Obinna Okafor's estate. Segun Adeyemi, you are sentenced to 20 years in prison and barred from holding any government contracts for life." As the sentences were read, Adaora felt her father's presence beside her. The construction empire he'd built would be restored, the stolen money returned, and the corrupt network dismantled. Outside the courthouse, she was surrounded by reporters and other victims who had found the courage to come forward. "Miss Okafor, what's next for you?" a journalist asked. "I'm returning to medical school," she replied. "My father always said that healing people was the highest calling. I want to honor his memory by helping others, not just through justice, but through compassion." Chinasa Ibe, who had been instrumental in the prosecution, approached her. "Thank you for giving me the strength to do the right thing. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Without you, they would have gotten away with everything." As they walked away from the courthouse, Adaora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd lost her inheritance, nearly lost her life, and discovered that the people she trusted most had betrayed her. But she'd also learned that justice was possible, even against the most powerful enemies. The money would be returned, the victims compensated, and the corruption exposed. But more importantly, she'd proven that ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary evil and win. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kelechi. "Congratulations on your victory. The EFCC is establishing a new task force to investigate religious fraud. Would you be interested in joining as a consultant?" Adaora smiled. Her fight for justice was just beginning. 6 months later, she stood in the same medical school auditorium where she'd once struggled to pay tuition. Now, as the recipient of a scholarship funded by the recovered assets from the fraud case, she was preparing to graduate with honors. "Today, we celebrate not just your academic achievements, but your commitment to serving others," the dean announced. "Some of you have overcome extraordinary challenges to reach this moment." As Adaora walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. Her father, whose legacy lived on. Chinasa, whose courage had exposed the truth. Kelechi, whose dedication had ensured justice. And even her enemies, whose greed had ultimately led to their downfall. The inscription on her diploma read, "Dr. Adaora Okafor, Doctor of Medicine." But she knew the real healing had happened long before she earned her degree. It had happened when she chose to fight for justice, even when the odds seemed impossible. As she looked out at the audience, she saw faces full of hope and determination. They were the next generation of healers, fighters, and justice seekers. And she knew that as long as people like them existed, corruption would never triumph over truth. The story of her stolen inheritance had become a story of redemption, not just for her, but for all the victims who had been silenced by fear and shame. Their voices had been heard, their suffering acknowledged, and their faith in justice restored. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story of betrayal, courage, and justice. Stories like Adaora's remind us that even in the darkest moments, we have the power to fight back and create change. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible. Until next time, keep believing in the power of truth.